My name is Evelyn, and I am 71 years old. As a retired federal judge, I dedicated my illustrious career to upholding justice, interpreting law with unwavering integrity. For 37 years, I sat on the bench ensuring fairness prevailed. I tirelessly provided a principled upbringing for my children, ensuring their education, their moral foundation. After my beloved husband's passing 5 years ago, I guided our family law firm with the same wisdom I brought to the courtroom, steering it through challenges, ensuring its impeccable reputation. This firm was our living legacy, built on trust and honor. Then, at what I thought was a routine partners meeting last Tuesday morning, my son Arthur, encouraged by his ruthless wife Brenda, launched a chilling coup that shattered my world. He accused me of being stagnant, out of touch with modern legal practice. They presented a formal vote to strip me of all influence in the firm I helped build. My daughter Lisa, my own flesh and blood, voted against me alongside the other partners. My grandson Kevin sneered at me with cold eyes, saying, "Your kind of law is dead, old woman. You have no humanity left." My life's work, my legacy lay in ruins. My sharp intellect and moral compass were publicly questioned by those I loved most. Yet, as despair threatened to consume me, my federal judge's unwavering sense of justice ignited something deeper. What Arthur, Brenda, Kevin, Lisa, and their lawyer didn't know was my secret weapon, an encrypted server containing real-time shadow accounting that exposed over $500,000 in their subtle financial mismanagement. Hidden watermarks on firm documents revealed their tampering. Most importantly, loyal old staff members still believed in me, still waited for my guidance. My judicial wisdom and sharp legal mind would strategically expose their insidious plot, reclaim my rightful position, and restore the firm's integrity. My true legacy would prevail. The morning after that devastating meeting, I stood outside Arthur's new corner office, my hands trembling as I gripped the brass door handle. The nameplate that once read Senior Partner Evelyn Matthews had been replaced overnight with Managing Partner Arthur Matthews. Each letter felt like a nail in my coffin. Inside, Arthur sat behind the mahogany desk his father and I had chosen together 25 years ago. Brenda perched on the arm of his chair like a vulture, her manicured fingers drumming against the leather. Mr. Thompson, our family lawyer for decades, stood by the window, his face unreadable. "Arthur," I began, my voice catching, despite my efforts to remain composed, "we need to talk about what happened yesterday. This isn't right, son. This isn't who we are." Arthur looked up from his papers with eyes that held no warmth, no recognition of the countless nights I'd helped him with his law school studies, the years I'd mentored him through his early cases. "Mom, it's time for new blood," he said, his voice clinically cold. "Your antiquated ethics are holding us back. The legal landscape has changed dramatically. Clients want results, not lengthy moral deliberations. You've become a liability to this firm's growth and profitability." Brenda's lips curved into what could barely be called a smile. "Honestly, Evelyn," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "your principles are financially draining. We've analyzed the numbers. Your insistence on pro bono work, your refusal to take on certain high-paying but ethically questionable cases, it's costing us hundreds of thousands annually. We need rapid expansion, aggressive strategies, the kind of thinking that actually generates real money." The words hit me like physical blows. Physical. I thought of all the sleepless nights I'd spent ensuring this firm's reputation remained spotless, all the difficult decisions I'd made to keep us on the right side of justice. "Arthur," I pleaded, my voice breaking, "this firm was built on integrity, on trust. Not just quick money. This is your father's legacy, our family's honor. How can you discard everything he stood for, everything I taught you? Remember when you were 8 years old and asked me why I became a judge? I told you it was to help people find truth. That's what this firm has always been about. Brenda stood up, smoothing her designer skirt, and walked around the desk to stand directly in front of me. The condescension in her eyes made my stomach turn. Honestly, Evelyn, you've had your run. A very long run, I might add. It's time to enjoy your full retirement, far from the burden of real business decisions. You're old, and frankly, you're irrelevant in today's legal market. Your principles are noble, sure, but they're financially draining. This is about survival. The door opened and Kevin walked in. My grandson, the boy I'd taught to ride a bicycle, whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose law school graduation I'd attended with such pride. He looked at me with those same cold, empty eyes I'd seen yesterday. "Grandma," he said, his voice flat and dismissive, "things are just different now. We need to modernize. Your kind of law is dead. The legal profession has evolved beyond your understanding. Just accept it, old woman. You have no humanity left for real progress." Then Lisa appeared in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes refusing to meet mine. My daughter, my baby girl, whispered so quietly, I almost didn't hear her. "Mom, please don't fight this. It'll just make things worse for everyone. They're right, about the firm needing to change. We need the money. The mortgage on my house, Kevin's student loans there, are practical considerations you don't understand anymore." Mr. Thompson stepped forward, pulling out a manila envelope. "Evelyn," he said formally, "I'm serving you with legal papers confirming your removal from all operational positions within Matthews & Associates. This includes revocation of your voting rights, your access to client files, and your authority to make any decisions regarding firm business." Arthur and Brenda immediately began implementing their new regime. They cut off my access to the firm's computer systems, changed the security codes, and restricted my entry to client files and communications. Within hours, they were making drastic, risky changes to our established legal processes, openly mocking my long-held ethical principles in front of our loyal staff members who had worked with me for decades. I watched in horror as Arthur instructed the maintenance crew to move my personal belongings from my corner office into a small, dusty storage room in the basement. My law books, my family photos, my father's gavel that I'd kept on my desk for 30 years, all of it treated like unwanted clutter. "This space needs to be converted into a conference room," Arthur explained to anyone who would listen. "We can't afford sentiment when we're trying to build something bigger." As I stood in that basement storage room surrounded by boxes of my life's work, I felt something die inside me. The dignity I'd spent 7 decades building, the respect I'd earned through years of principled service, all of it stripped away by the people who should have protected it most. Within 2 weeks of my removal, Arthur and Brenda's true agenda became horrifyingly clear. They announced aggressive new legal strategies that pushed every ethical boundary I'd spent decades respecting. High-risk, high-profit cases that preyed on vulnerable clients became their specialty. They publicly ridiculed what they called outdated legal ethics as nothing more than a hindrance to profitable progress. During a staff meeting I wasn't invited to, but heard about, through Margaret, my former secretary who'd worked for the firm for 28 years, Arthur declared that my advisory role was permanently terminated. Not even honorary, not even ceremonial. Brenda suggested I should consider relocating to Sunset Manor, a retirement community 3 hours away. For her health, she'd said with that same cruel smile. But it was the leaked reports that broke my heart completely. Margaret and 2 other longtime employees loyal to the firm's original principles began secretly sharing internal documents with me. What I discovered made me physically ill. Arthur's new cases involved blatant ethical violations that would have resulted in immediate disbarment if discovered. Questionable client dealings where he deliberately withheld crucial information, intentional delays that cost clients thousands of dollars while padding the firm's billable hours, inflated billing practices that bordered on outright fraud. The chilling clarity hit me like a sledgehammer. This wasn't about modernization or new vision. This was systematic corruption and professional misconduct. Arthur and Brenda weren't just sidelining me. They were actively plundering and corrupting the very principled foundation of the law firm I'd helped build. Every case they took seemed designed to extract maximum profit with minimum ethical consideration. Sitting alone in my empty house that night, surrounded by the boxes of belongings they'd unceremoniously returned to me, I was forced to confront the most painful irony of my entire life. In the darkness of my living room, I finally allowed myself to remember what I'd done for Arthur 23 years ago. Arthur, as a young, ambitious lawyer, fresh out of law school, had made a catastrophic mistake. He'd been caught tampering with evidence in a high-profile case, altering documents to favor his client. The State Bar Association had launched a formal investigation that would have resulted in his immediate disbarment and criminal charges. His legal career would have been over before it truly began. I was a federal judge, then rising through the ranks with connections throughout the legal system. Arthur never knew the full extent of what I did to save him. I spent months carefully orchestrating a discreet campaign to suppress the public record of the ethics complaint. I called in every favor I'd ever earned, leveraged relationships I'd built over decades, and used my knowledge of legal loopholes to create reasonable doubt about the evidence against him. The cost was enormous. I sacrificed years of my own judicial impartiality, taking cases I should have recused myself from making decisions that compromised my integrity to maintain the network of favors I needed to protect Arthur. I risked my entire career, my reputation, everything I'd worked for. The investigation quietly disappeared, and Arthur believed he'd navigated the crisis through his own legal brilliance. I never told him. I let him think he'd saved himself because I wanted him to learn from his mistakes, to grow into the ethical lawyer I knew he could become. Instead, I'd apparently taught him that corners could be cut, that consequences could be avoided, that ethics were negotiable. Now, 23 years later, he was accusing me of being antiquated, out of touch, ethically rigid. The unbearable irony was suffocating. When I attempted to subtly warn Arthur about the ethical risks of his new strategies, drawing on my decades of judicial wisdom, he exploded. "Mom, this is sabotage," he shouted during what I'd hoped would be a private conversation in the firm's parking lot. "You're trying to regain control by spreading fear and doubt. You can't accept that your time is over." Brenda, who seemed to appear whenever conflict arose, publicly mocked my old-fashioned caution in front of 3 junior associates and a client. "Some people just can't keep up with the pace of real growth in law," she announced loudly. "Ethics are for textbooks, not the courtroom. This is about winning, about results, about building something substantial." Kevin, my own grandson, reinforced this cruelty with words that cut deeper than any legal brief. "Grandma, you just don't understand how modern law works," he said, his voice carrying the dismissive tone one might use with a confused child. "It's about winning, about providing results, not sentiment and ancient moral codes that nobody follows anymore." The final blow came when Mr. Thompson, the lawyer who'd handled my husband's will, who'd been present at Kevin's baptism, formally presented me with a buyout offer for my remaining shares in the firm. The amount was laughably insulting a fraction of my actual investment and the firm's current valuation. It was designed to permanently sever my ties while giving them complete control. If you don't accept this generous offer, Thompson explained with the cold professionalism of a stranger, the partners are prepared to take more decisive action. There are legal mechanisms available to us, Evelyn. Questions about competency, about your ability to make sound business decisions. We'd rather not go that route, but we will if necessary. The threat was clear: accept their pittance or face a public competency hearing that would destroy not just my financial stake, but my reputation, my dignity, everything I had left. As I sat in my car that night staring at the building where I'd spent the best years of my life, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The profound pain was still there. The despair still threatened to overwhelm me. But underneath it all, a cold, righteous anger was beginning to burn. They had underestimated me, forgotten who I really was beneath the loving mother and grandmother facade. I was still a federal judge. I still knew how to fight. And I had weapons they didn't even know existed. The end came with the cold efficiency of a legal execution. 3 days after I'd refused their insulting buyout offer, a certified letter arrived at my home. The envelope bore the firm's letterhead, but the warmth and familiarity that name had once carried was gone forever. The letter, signed by Mr. Thompson in his capacity as the firm's legal counsel, was a masterpiece of legal brutality. The partners, now completely controlled by Arthur and Brenda, had officially terminated my senior partner position, revoked my access to all firm premises and client files, and initiated legal proceedings to forcibly buy out my remaining shares based on insubordination and actions detrimental to firm reputation. It was a calculated, brutal, legal, and emotional removal from my life's work designed to publicly shame me within the legal community where I'd spent my entire career. The letter specifically mentioned that my continued interference with firm operations and my attempts to undermine new business strategies constituted grounds for immediate severance of all professional relationships. The next morning, I drove to the firm one last time, hoping against hope that I could make one final appeal to whatever remained of my children's conscience. The security guard, a young man I'd never seen before, stopped me at the front entrance. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but you're not authorized to enter this building," he said, consulting a list on his clipboard. "Your access has been permanently revoked." Through the glass doors, I could see Arthur in the lobby talking with several clients. Our eyes met for a moment, and I saw him whisper something to the security guard's supervisor. Then Lisa appeared, walking toward the entrance, her face streaked with tears. "Lisa." I called out, my voice breaking. "Please, this is Dad's legacy, our family's integrity. You know what's right. You remember what this firm used to stand for." Lisa stopped at the glass door, her hand pressed against it, as if she were trapped behind a barrier she couldn't cross. For a moment, I thought I saw the daughter I'd raised, the little girl who used to bring me dandelions and call them flowers. She opened her mouth as if to speak, glanced back at Arthur, then whispered something so quietly I couldn't hear it through the glass. Arthur walked over and placed his hand on Lisa's shoulder, guiding her away from the door. In that agonizing moment, watching my daughter turn away from me, I understood the profound, irreversible nature of her complicity. She wasn't just allowing this to happen, she was actively participating in my destruction. Arthur approached the glass doors and spoke to me through the intercom system. His voice, amplified and distorted by the electronic speaker, sounded like it was coming from another world. "Mom, just get her out of here," he said to the security guard, but loud enough for me to hear. "No more access, ever. This is finished." Brenda appeared beside him, her face glowing with triumphant satisfaction. She leaned into the intercom and said, "Honestly, this firm is far too important for sentimentality. She's old, and frankly, she's become completely irrelevant to our success." But the cruelest blow came from Kevin, who pushed past both of them to speak directly into the intercom. My grandson, the boy whose college tuition I'd paid, whose career I'd launched with my connections, looked directly at me through the glass and said, "Grandma, your kind of law is dead. Just accept it, old woman. You have no humanity left for anything useful." His words echoed in the lobby, and I saw several staff members and clients turn to stare. The public humiliation was complete, witnessed by people who had once respected me, who had once sought my counsel and wisdom. 6 weeks later, I found myself in Sunset Manor, the assisted living facility Brenda had suggested. My savings, depleted by legal fees and the forced sale of my home to pay Arthur's legal team, barely covered the monthly costs. Most of my personal belongings had been lost during the transition, leaving me with only a few photo albums and the clothes I could fit in 2 suitcases. Sitting alone in my sterile room with its institutional furniture and cheerful patronizing artwork, I finally allowed myself to confront the deepest, most guarded secret of my entire life. The one sacrifice that made everything else pale in comparison. 32 years ago, when I was 49 years old and at the peak of my judicial career, I received a call that changed everything. The governor's office was offering me a nomination to the Federal Court of Appeals, the second highest court in the nation. It was the pinnacle of any judge's career, a position that would have meant prestige beyond imagination, a salary exceeding $200,000 annually, and the opportunity to shape federal law for generations. I had dreamed of that appointment since my first day in law school. It represented everything I'd worked for, sacrificed, earned through decades of impeccable service. The interview process had gone perfectly. The nomination was mine for the taking. But 3 days before I was scheduled to accept, my husband came to me with tears in his eyes and a confession that shattered my world. In the early years of our law firm, desperate to establish our reputation and secure our family's future, he had engaged in a subtle but devastating conflict of interest. He had represented both sides of a property dispute, using inside information from one client to benefit another, resulting in a settlement that earned our firm a substantial fee, but violated fundamental legal ethics. The evidence was buried deep in old files, unlikely to ever surface. But if my appointment to the appeals court triggered the intensive background investigation that came with federal positions, it would be discovered. Not only would it destroy his reputation and our firm, but my association with the practice would end my judicial career as well. "Evelyn," he said, his voice breaking, "I was young and stupid and desperate. I thought I could handle both sides fairly, but I made decisions based on information I shouldn't have had. If they find out, if this comes to light during your confirmation process, we'll lose everything. Not just the firm, but our family's future, the kids' education, all of it." I stared at him, this man I'd loved since law school, this partner I'd trusted with my life and career, and felt my dreams crumble into dust. The appeals court appointment, my life's ambition, the judicial legacy I'd worked 30 years to achieve, all of it, disappeared in that moment. I withdrew my name from consideration the next day, citing family obligations. I never told anyone the real reason, never revealed my husband's secret, never allowed myself to show the depth of my loss. I went back to my state judgeship, pretending it was enough, pretending I hadn't sacrificed my ultimate professional goal to protect the reputation of a firm that would eventually cast me out like garbage. The federal appeals court salary alone would have been worth over $6 million during the remainder of my career. The pension benefits, the influence, the opportunity to shape constitutional law, the respect and recognition that came with the position, all of it sacrificed to protect my family's honor. Now, sitting in this assisted living facility, abandoned by the very people I'd protected, I finally understood the cosmic cruelty of my situation. Every sacrifice I'd made, every dream I'd abandoned, every compromise I'd accepted had been for people who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to their own ambitions. But as I sat there in the gathering darkness of my institutional room, something began to stir inside me. Something that felt familiar. Something that remembered what it meant to be a federal judge, what it meant to fight for justice, what it meant to never surrender in the face of corruption. They had underestimated me one final time, and that mistake would cost them everything. The walls of Memory Lane Gardens closed around me like a psychological prison designed to break whatever remained of my spirit. The facility's cheerful name was a cruel joke, a mockery of the memories they were systematically trying to erase. Dr. Miller, the facility's director, had been generously compensated by Arthur and Brenda to ensure my proper care, which apparently included a daily regimen of psychological gaslighting that would have impressed the most ruthless interrogator. Every morning began with the same humiliating routine. "Good morning, Evelyn," the nurses would say with patronizing sweetness. "How are we feeling today? Do you remember where you are?" When I responded with the sharp clarity of a woman who had spent decades interpreting complex constitutional law, they would exchange knowing glances and make notes on their clipboards. My attempts to discuss legal precedents or draft arguments for my eventual appeal were met with condescending smiles and gentle redirection. "You're a resident now, dear, not a judge," they would remind me, as if my 37 years on the federal bench were nothing more than delusions of grandeur. When I asked for paper to write legal briefs, they brought me adult coloring books featuring butterflies and flowers. "We think creative activities might be more appropriate for you right now," Dr. Miller explained during one of our mandatory weekly sessions. "Your family has expressed concerns about your tendency toward obsessive behaviors regarding legal matters. It's quite common for people in your situation to have difficulty accepting retirement. The cruelest torture came in the form of Arthur and Brenda's carefully orchestrated visits with my grandchildren. Every 2 weeks, like clockwork, they would arrive with Kevin and Emily in tow, their faces carefully arranged in expressions of dutiful concern. The children had been thoroughly coached, their natural affection for me replaced by confused pity and leading questions designed to reinforce the narrative of my mental decline. "Grandma, do you remember who I am?" Kevin would ask, his voice carrying none of the warmth that had once filled our conversations about his law school ambitions. He was 22, now a recent graduate, who should have been seeking my counsel and wisdom. Instead, he looked at me like I was a stranger wearing his grandmother's face. During one particularly devastating visit, Kevin pulled out his phone and showed me a photograph that made my heart stop. It was him and Arthur standing in front of the law firm, but the building looked completely different. Gone was the elegant brass nameplate that had read Matthews and Associates, founded 1987. In its place was a modern, sterile sign that read Matthews Legal Group, Progressive Solutions for Modern Challenges. "Dad says you don't need to worry about the firm anymore, Grandma." Kevin said, his words carefully rehearsed. "Everything's being handled, You can just focus on getting better. Emily, my sweet granddaughter, who was only 16, had been trained to bring me what Brenda called comfort items. She would arrive with puzzle books meant for children, large print magazines about celebrities I didn't recognize, and soft blankets covered in cartoon characters. The message was clear. I was no longer the brilliant legal mind who had shaped her understanding of justice. I was a confused old woman who needed simple pleasures to get through the day. "We thought you might like this," Emily would say, handing me a coloring book about garden scenes. "Mom says creative activities are good for people who are having memory problems." The emotional distance in their eyes was unbearable. These children who had once run to me for homework, help who had begged for stories about my most interesting cases, now looked at me with the careful politeness reserved for fragile strangers. Brenda had poisoned them against me so thoroughly that my own grandchildren saw me as a burden to be managed rather than a grandmother to be cherished. But the most devastating blow came through the internet, where Brenda had launched a public campaign to cement her narrative of the firm's transformation. She posted before and after renderings of proposed renovations to our historic building, showcasing plans that would strip away every element that held meaning for me. The original etched glass door installed when we first opened the firm would be replaced with modern steel and glass. The antique law library that my husband had spent decades curating, filled with first edition legal texts and historical documents, would be converted into a collaborative workspace with modern furniture and computer stations. Out with the old, in with the new. Brenda captioned one post showing a rendering of my former corner office transformed into what she called a dynamic conference space. The mahogany bookshelves where I had kept my most treasured legal references would be replaced with sleek metal fixtures holding modern technology. The comments section filled with congratulations from colleagues and clients who didn't understand what they were really celebrating. "Such vision," they wrote. "Finally bringing that old firm into the 21st century." Each compliment felt like another nail in the coffin of everything I had built. My financial situation grew more desperate by the day. Arthur, now my court-appointed guardian, had gained complete control over my personal bank accounts. My federal pension payments, which should have ensured my dignity in retirement, were automatically diverted to pay for my care at Memory Lane Gardens. When I tried to contact my own lawyer, a man I had known for 15 years, I was told that Mr. Thompson had advised him that I was no longer competent to make legal decisions. The facility staff began referring to me as a high-maintenance resident whose family rarely visits. They spoke about me as if I weren't there, discussing my behavioral issues and resistance to treatment within earshot of other residents. The isolation was complete and carefully orchestrated. But then in my darkest moment, when I had begun to question my own sanity, something unexpected happened. Margaret, a new aide who worked the night shift, approached me during one of my sleepless walks down the hallway. She was a young woman, probably in her 20s, with kind eyes and a gentle manner that seemed genuine rather than professionally mandated. "Mrs. Matthews," she whispered, glancing around to make sure we weren't being observed. "I've been reading about your case online. Some of the things being said, they don't match the woman I see when I talk to you." She slipped something small into my hand. It was a pocket-sized copy of the U.S. Constitution, worn and well-read. Inside the front cover, written in fading ink, were the words, "Justice prevails," from a fellow believer in truth. "Someone left this at the front desk for you," Margaret explained quietly. "They said you would understand what it meant." As I held that small book in my trembling hands, something stirred inside me. that I had thought was lost forever. The familiar weight of constitutional law, the principles I had spent my life defending, the unwavering belief that truth and justice could triumph over lies and corruption. Someone out there still believed in me. Someone was watching, waiting, remembering who I really was beneath this carefully constructed narrative of decline. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to hope that my hidden evidence, my encrypted files, my loyal allies might still be accessible. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. The news reached me through the common room television at Memory Lane Gardens, where residents gathered each morning for what the staff cheerfully called current events time. I was half listening to the morning show when I heard the words that made my blood run cold: Ethics in Modern Law Conference. The news anchor was interviewing Arthur, who sat behind an impressive mahogany desk in what had once been my office. He looked polished, confident, every inch the successful legal professional. Behind him, I could see the wall where my judicial commendations had once hung, now decorated with modern art and motivational posters about innovative legal solutions. Judge Matthews, the interviewer said, using the title that should have been mine, "You're presenting the keynote address at this year's National Ethics in Modern Law Conference. Can you tell us about your groundbreaking approach to modernizing legal practice?" Arthur smiled with the practiced ease of a man who had perfected the art of deception. Traditional legal ethics, he said, his voice carrying the authority I had spent decades teaching him to project, while well-intentioned, can sometimes become rigid barriers to providing clients with the aggressive representation they deserve in today's competitive landscape. I gripped the arms of my wheelchair, my knuckles turning white as I watched my own son systematically dismantle everything I had ever believed in. He was using my judicial reputation, my years of ethical service, as a platform to promote the exact opposite of everything I had taught him. For too long, Arthur continued, law firms have been held back by antiquated approaches that prioritize theoretical principles over practical results. My recent experience in transitioning our firm from old guard leadership to a more dynamic, client-focused model has taught me that sometimes the most ethical thing you can do is acknowledge when traditional methods are no longer serving justice. The interviewer nodded approvingly. And this transition wasn't without its challenges, I understand. Arthur's expression grew solemn, perfectly calibrated to convey both respect and gentle sadness. My mother, the former judge, Evelyn Matthews, dedicated her life to a particular vision of legal ethics that served its purpose in its time. But as her mental acuity began to decline, it became clear that her rigid adherence to outdated principles was actually harming our clients and our firm's ability to serve justice effectively. I felt something break inside me as I watched him weaponize my supposed mental decline to justify his corruption. Every word was carefully chosen to sound respectful while systematically destroying my professional legacy. He was presenting himself as the dutiful son who had made the difficult but necessary decision to step in when his aging mother could no longer distinguish between principled practice and stubborn inflexibility. The camera cut to Brenda, who had positioned herself as an expert on managing transitions in family law firms. She spoke with the polished confidence of someone who had rehearsed these talking points extensively. Evelyn's principles were beautiful in their idealism. Brenda said, her voice dripping with false sympathy, but increasingly confusing in their application. She would spend hours agonizing over ethical considerations that frankly had no bearing on our clients' actual needs. When someone you love begins to lose their capacity for complex reasoning, the most compassionate thing you can do is ensure they're protected from making decisions that could harm others. The interviewer leaned forward with interest. And how has the firm changed under this new leadership approach? Brenda's eyes lit up with genuine enthusiasm for the first time in the interview. We've seen unprecedented growth, she said proudly. Our client satisfaction ratings have skyrocketed because we're finally able to focus on results rather than getting bogged down in theoretical ethical debates. We've streamlined our processes, eliminated unnecessary delays, and implemented aggressive strategies that deliver the outcomes our clients are paying for. What she was describing in carefully coded language was the systematic abandonment of every ethical safeguard I had spent decades implementing. The unnecessary delays were the careful review processes that ensured we never took advantage of clients. The aggressive strategies were the boundary-pushing tactics that risked bar sanctions but generated higher fees. The worst moment came when they showed a pre-recorded video message from Kevin, my grandson, speaking from what appeared to be a law school classroom. He looked directly into the camera with the earnest sincerity of youth, completely unaware that he was being used as a weapon against his own grandmother. My grandmother taught me to love the law, Kevin said, his voice carrying the passion I remembered from our long conversations about justice and truth. But she also taught me that the law must serve people, not the other way around. Grandfather Arthur's new approach to legal practice honors her legacy by focusing on what she always said was most important, helping people solve their problems and move forward with their lives. The video had been expertly edited to make it seem like Kevin was endorsing Arthur's methods while honoring my memory. But I knew my grandson and I could see the subtle signs that he had been coached, that certain phrases had been suggested to him, that his natural love and respect for me had been manipulated to serve Arthur and Brenda's narrative. Sometimes, Kevin continued looking directly into the camera, the most loving thing you can do is move beyond sentimental attachments to old ways of doing things. Progress requires letting go of practices that no longer serve justice, even when they come from people we love and respect. As the segment concluded, the interviewer smiled warmly at Arthur and Brenda. It sounds like you've managed a difficult transition with remarkable grace and wisdom. Any advice for other family firms facing similar challenges? Arthur nodded solemnly. The legal profession attracts people with strong principles and deep convictions. Those qualities serve the profession well, but they can also make it difficult to adapt when circumstances change. My advice would be to remember that our ultimate duty is to our clients and to justice itself, not to preserving outdated methods simply because they're familiar or comfortable. The interview concluded with information about the upcoming Ethics in Modern Law conference, where Arthur would be presenting his keynote address on transitioning family firms from traditional to dynamic practice models. The conference promised to feature leading experts on modernizing legal ethics and managing age-related decline in senior partners. As the television cut to commercial, I sat in my wheelchair in the common room of Memory Lane Gardens, surrounded by other residents who had drifted off to sleep or lost interest in the program. The aide changed the channel to a game show, and the cheerful sounds of spinning wheels and applauding audiences filled the room. But I couldn't hear anything except the echo of my son's words, the sound of my entire professional legacy being systematically dismantled and rebuilt as a cautionary tale about the dangers of rigid thinking and mental decline. Everything I had fought for, every principle I had upheld, every sacrifice I had made was being repackaged as evidence of my own limitations and failures. The most devastating part wasn't just that Arthur and Brenda were succeeding in their campaign to erase my legacy. It was that they were doing it while claiming to honor me, while presenting themselves as loving family members who had made difficult but necessary decisions to protect both me and the clients I had supposedly endangered with my inflexibility. As I sat there, tears streaming down my face while the other residents dozed around me, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The despair was still there. The heartbreak still threatened to overwhelm me, but underneath it all, a cold fury was beginning to burn. They had turned my own grandson into a weapon against me. They had perverted my life's work into a justification for everything I had spent my career fighting against. But somewhere out there, a retired federal judge was watching this travesty unfold. And according to the note Margaret had whispered to me that morning, he was not impressed with what he was seeing. The final assault came with the brutal efficiency of a military campaign designed to leave no survivors. I was in my room at Memory Lane Gardens, trying to make sense of some legal documents that Margaret had secretly brought me, when Mr. Thompson arrived with a briefcase full of papers that would complete my destruction. "Evelyn," he said, settling into the visitor's chair with the comfortable authority of a man who held all the cards, "I'm afraid we have some serious matters to discuss. Arthur has been forced to take legal action to protect the firm and the family from your ongoing difficulties." He opened his briefcase and withdrew a thick stack of legal documents. The top page bore the seal of the State Superior Court and the words that made my heart stop. Arthur Matthews versus Evelyn Matthews, complaint for damages and injunctive relief. Arthur is seeking $750,000 in damages. Mr. Thompson explained with the clinical detachment of a surgeon describing a necessary amputation. The complaint alleges emotional distress damage to the firm's reputation and financial losses resulting from your harassment of staff clients and business partners following your retirement. I stared at the documents, my hands shaking, as I tried to process what I was reading. They had taken my life's work, stripped me of my dignity, confined me to this facility, and now they were demanding $750,000 for the privilege of having been destroyed by them. "This is ridiculous," I managed to whisper. "I never harassed anyone. I was trying to protect the firm from their corruption." Mr. Thompson nodded sympathetically, as if dealing with a confused child. "I understand this is difficult to accept, Evelyn, but there's documented evidence of your increasingly erratic behavior. Phone calls to clients expressing paranoid concerns about Arthur's management. Letters to the State Bar Association making unfounded accusations. Attempts to access firm files after your retirement. All of this has created significant problems for the business." But the lawsuit was only the beginning. Even as Mr. Thompson was explaining the financial complaint, Arthur was executing a coordinated attack on every remaining source of security I had. Using his position as my court-appointed guardian and his reputation in the legal community, he contacted the federal court administration and my retirement fund managers with fabricated reports about my mental competence. The phone call to Judge Henderson, my former colleague and the administrator of federal judicial pensions, was particularly devastating. Arthur, speaking in the concerned tones of a dutiful son, explained that I had been exhibiting signs of severe cognitive decline, making inappropriate financial decisions, and engaging in behavior that reflected poorly on the federal judiciary. "I'm deeply concerned about the impact this might have on the reputation of the federal bench," Arthur told Judge Henderson. "My mother's recent actions suggest that her mental state may have been compromised for some time, possibly affecting her decisions in cases she presided over before her retirement." The implication was clear: if I was mentally incompetent. Now, how could anyone be certain that my judicial decisions had been sound? The suggestion that my past rulings might have been the product of diminished capacity was enough to trigger an immediate review of my pension eligibility and judicial honors. Within a week, I received a formal letter from the Federal Court Administration informing me that my pension was being suspended pending an investigation into allegations of misconduct and mental incompetency. The letter, written in the same formal language I had once used in my own judicial orders, stripped away the final foundation of my financial security. The allegations suggest a pattern of behavior inconsistent with the standards expected of federal judicial officers. The letter stated, "Until these matters can be thoroughly investigated, all pension payments and professional honors are hereby suspended." The investigation they referenced was a sham based entirely on Arthur's fabricated reports and Brenda's carefully constructed narrative of my decline. But the bureaucratic machinery had been set in motion, and there was no one left to speak for me, no colleague willing to risk their own reputation by defending someone who had been so thoroughly discredited. The mounting legal fees from defending against Arthur's spurious lawsuit, combined with the loss of my pension, made it impossible to continue paying for even basic accommodations. The modest apartment I had found, after being forced out of Memory Lane Gardens, became unaffordable, and I found myself facing the ultimate humiliation: homelessness. Brenda, with a cruelty that took my breath away, timed my eviction to coincide with a local television news story about the city's growing population of elderly homeless individuals. She contacted the news station anonymously, suggesting they might find an interesting story in the plight of a former judge whose family has been forced to practice tough love. The cameras were there when the sheriff's deputies arrived to carry out my eviction. I stood on the sidewalk in my only remaining dress, watching as my few remaining possessions were loaded into garbage bags and placed on the curb. The news reporter, a young woman who clearly didn't understand the full story, approached me with microphone in hand. "Ma'am, can you tell us how you ended up in this situation?" she asked with the practiced sympathy of someone fishing for a good sound bite. I looked directly into the camera, knowing that Arthur and Brenda would be watching, knowing that this moment of humiliation was exactly what they had orchestrated. "I was a federal judge for 37 years. I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I dedicated my life to justice and truth, and this is how it ends." The reporter nodded sympathetically, but I could see in her eyes that she had already been briefed on my situation. To her, I was just another elderly person who had made poor decisions and was now paying the price. The idea that this might be the result of a systematic campaign of destruction was beyond her comprehension. My adult children, Mark and Lisa, maintained their chilling indifference throughout my descent into destitution. When contacted by the news station for comment, Mark issued a carefully worded statement through his lawyer. "My family has made numerous attempts to help my mother, but we cannot enable her self-destructive behavior. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is allow someone to experience the consequences of their choices." Lisa, posting on her social media accounts, shared inspirational quotes about setting healthy boundaries and not being responsible for other people's happiness. Her subtle implication was clear: I was a drama-creating burden that she had wisely chosen to distance herself from. The cruelest blow came when Brenda used money derived from the firm's new aggressive growth strategies to purchase a custom-built home library worth over $200,000. She arranged for a photographer to document the installation, creating a glossy photo spread that she shared widely on social media and in local lifestyle magazines. "This is my tribute to Arthur's business acumen and foresight," Brenda announced at the library's dedication ceremony, which was attended by local dignitaries and legal professionals. "He had the vision to modernize our firm and create the success that makes this kind of investment possible." The library featured floor-to-ceiling mahogany shelves, first edition legal texts, and a custom-designed reading area with leather chairs and antique lamps. It was everything I had dreamed of having in my own home, built with money that had been stolen from the firm I had spent my life building. The photographs showed Brenda and Arthur posing proudly in their new library, surrounded by the fruits of their corruption. The local legal journal ran a feature story about their inspiring success story and their innovative approach to firm management. The physical toll of the relentless psychological and financial siege finally overwhelmed my body's ability to endure. I was staying in a crowded homeless shelter, sharing a room with 6 other women when the crushing chest pain began. The stress, the malnutrition, the constant fear and humiliation had pushed my 71-year-old heart beyond its limits. I collapsed in the shelter's common room during dinner, my body finally surrendering to the systematic destruction that had consumed my life. The paramedics who responded found me unconscious, my pulse weak and irregular, my body shutting down under the weight of unbearable stress. As I lay in the emergency room, hovering between consciousness and oblivion, my mind drifted back to a case I had presided over 30 years earlier. In my semi-conscious state, fragmented memories began to coalesce into a chilling realization that my conscious mind had refused to acknowledge. The case involved a complex real estate fraud, a scheme where innocent investors had been manipulated into purchasing worthless properties through carefully crafted deceptions. As the details crystallized in my dying mind, I realized with horrible clarity that my husband Arthur's father had been peripherally involved in that very fraud. Not as a mastermind, but as a lawyer who had provided legal cover for some of the transactions, who had drafted documents that facilitated the deception while maintaining plausible deniability. I had suppressed this knowledge at the time, convinced myself that his involvement was innocent, that he couldn't have known what his clients were really doing. But lying there in that hospital bed, my life ebbing away, I could no longer deny what I had always known. Arthur had learned his capacity for ethical compromise from his father, and I had spent 30 years protecting them, both sacrificing my own integrity to preserve their reputations. The revelation filled me with a desperate, furious resolve. If I survived this, if my body could endure just a little longer, I would expose not just Arthur and Brenda's corruption, but the deeper truth about the ethical rot that had infected my family for decades. Justice demanded nothing less than complete truth, no matter how much it cost me. The hospital room felt like a confessional booth where I would either find redemption or take my final breath. The heart attack had left me weak, but strangely clear-minded, as if the brush with death had burned away all the confusion and self-doubt that had clouded my judgment for months. The revelation about my husband's involvement in that decades-old fraud case had crystallized into an unshakable determination to expose the full truth. Margaret, the kind aide from Memory Lane Gardens, had somehow tracked me down through the hospital system. She arrived during visiting hours with a small video camera she had borrowed from her boyfriend, a journalism student at the local community college. "Mrs. Matthews," she whispered, glancing around to make sure we weren't being observed. "If you want to tell your story, really tell it. This might be your only chance. That nurse over there has been asking a lot of questions about your visitors. I think someone's been paying the staff to monitor you." With Margaret's help, I propped myself up in the hospital bed and began recording what I knew would be my final testimony. My voice was weak from the breathing tube, but my mind was razor sharp with the clarity that comes from having nothing left to lose. My name is Evelyn Matthews. I began looking directly into the camera lens. I am 71 years old, a retired federal judge, and I am recording this message from my hospital bed because I may not have another opportunity to tell the truth about what my son Arthur and his wife Brenda have done to me, to our law firm, and to the principles of justice I have spent my life defending. I detailed everything Arthur's past ethical violations, that I had covered up the systematic financial fraud they were committing at the firm, the way they had manipulated my grandchildren and turned my own family against me. Most importantly, I played audio recordings I had secretly made years earlier when my husband confessed his involvement in questionable real estate transactions. Arthur Matthews is not the ethical legal innovator he pretends to be. I said, my voice growing stronger as I spoke. He is following in his father's footsteps, using our family's reputation to provide cover for activities that should result in his disbarment. The firm that bears our name has become a criminal enterprise, and I have documentation to prove it. I pulled out copies of the encrypted files I had hidden evidence of the shadow accounting that showed their embezzlement of client funds. These documents show systematic theft of over $500,000 from client accounts. They show billing fraud evidence tampering and a pattern of corruption that goes back to the day Arthur took control of the firm. The most painful part of the recording was my direct appeal to Arthur himself. Looking into the camera with tears streaming down my face, I spoke to the little boy I had raised, the son I had sacrificed everything to protect. Arthur, if you ever loved me, if you ever had any respect for your father's memory or the principles he tried to instill in you, despite his own failings, please stop this madness. You don't have to destroy innocent people to be successful. You don't have to corrupt everything we built together. There's still time to choose justice over greed, integrity over profit. Margaret helped me address the video to Arthur's personal email, the one I knew he checked obsessively throughout the day. We sent it from her boyfriend's encrypted account, hoping that by routing it through multiple servers, we could get it past whatever monitoring systems Brenda had undoubtedly put in place. But we had underestimated the extent of their surveillance. Arthur and Brenda had bribed staff members at every institution where I had been confined, creating a network of informants who reported my activities in real time. Within an hour of sending the video, Brenda's technology consultant had intercepted the message and began the process of weaponizing it against me. What Brenda did next was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. She took my raw emotional testimony and fed it through sophisticated editing software, subtly altering the tone and context of my words. She added ominous background music, spliced sentences together out of order, and inserted strategic pauses that made my desperate pleas sound like the paranoid ramblings of a mentally unstable woman. Most devastatingly, she isolated my references to the audio recordings of my husband's confessions and framed them as evidence of my grandiose delusions about events that had never happened. The very proof I was offering of our family's ethical compromises was presented as confirmation of my deteriorating mental state. Brenda sold this heavily doctored video to Legal Insider, a national gossip show that specialized in sensationalizing scandals within the legal profession. The show's host, a former prosecutor who had been disbarred for his own ethical violations, presented my testimony as a tragic example of how mental illness could destroy even the most accomplished legal minds. What you're about to see is heartbreaking. the host announced to his national audience. Judge Evelyn Matthews, once a respected federal jurist, has been reduced to making wild accusations against her own family. The video was apparently recorded without the knowledge of her medical team, raising serious questions about her capacity to distinguish between reality and delusion. They played carefully selected excerpts from my video, focusing on the moments where my voice broke with emotion and skipping over the specific evidence I had presented. My desperate appeal to Arthur's conscience was edited to sound like the manipulation of a dying woman trying to regain control over family members who had rightfully moved on with their lives. Mental health experts tell us that elderly individuals experiencing cognitive decline often develop elaborate conspiracy theories about family members, the host explained. They may become convinced that loved ones are plotting against them, even fabricating evidence to support these delusions. The show brought in a psychiatrist who had never examined me, but was willing to offer a professional opinion based on the edited video. What we're seeing here is consistent with paranoid dementia, he explained. The patient creates an elaborate narrative that casts herself as the victim of a complex plot, often involving the very people who are trying to help her. The most crushing blow came when Arthur agreed to appear on the show for what was billed as an exclusive interview about the challenges of caring for a parent with mental illness. He sat across from the host in the firm's conference room, looking every inch the concerned son bearing an unbearable burden with grace and dignity. This video broke my heart. Arthur said, his voice perfectly calibrated to convey pain and exhaustion. To see someone I love and respect reduced to these kinds of desperate accusations, it's devastating. My mother was brilliant, truly one of the finest legal minds of her generation. But the woman in that video isn't the mother who raised me. The host leaned forward with practiced sympathy. How long has she been experiencing these symptoms? Arthur paused, as if gathering the strength to speak about something almost too painful to discuss. The decline has been gradual, but unmistakable, he said. It started with small things, forgetting client names, becoming confused about case details. We tried to help her maintain her dignity by allowing her to stay involved in the firm, but eventually her condition made that impossible. And now she's making these serious accusations against you and your family. Arthur's eyes filled with carefully manufactured tears. The hardest part is knowing that somewhere inside that confusion and anger is the woman who taught me everything I know about justice and integrity. She would be horrified to know that her illness is causing her to attack the very principles she spent her life defending. Kevin appeared via video link from his law school, looking genuinely distressed, as he had been coached to appear. I just want my grandmother to be at peace, he said, his voice breaking with what seemed like authentic emotion. She's fighting battles that don't exist, seeing enemies where there are only people who love her and want to help. Lisa joined the interview by phone, her voice carefully modulated to convey both love and exhaustion. We've tried everything, she said. Private care family interventions, the best medical treatment we can afford. But sometimes mental illness is stronger than love, stronger than family bonds. All we can do is ensure she's safe and hope that somewhere in her heart she knows we're doing our best. The show concluded with information about resources for families dealing with elderly relatives experiencing paranoid dementia. Arthur and Brenda were praised for their courage in speaking publicly about such a private family tragedy, with several legal commentators noting how difficult it must be to maintain a successful practice while dealing with such personal challenges. As the program aired to a national audience of millions, I lay in my hospital bed, watching my life's final testimony being transformed into evidence of my own mental incompetence. Every true word I had spoken, every piece of legitimate evidence I had presented, every desperate plea for justice, had been twisted into proof that I was exactly what they claimed, a confused old woman whose mind had finally succumbed to the weight of years. But Margaret squeezed my hand as the program ended, and I saw something in her eyes that gave me a flicker of hope. She had heard my original recording before Brenda's editors had gotten their hands on it. She knew the truth, and she was already planning to contact the one person who might still have the power to help me. My former head clerk, Patricia Williams, had spent 23 years managing my courtroom and had kept meticulous records of every case that had passed through my chambers. If anyone would remember the details of that real estate fraud case, if anyone would be able to verify my husband's involvement and understand the implications for Arthur's current behavior, it would be Patricia. As I drifted off to sleep in that sterile hospital room, surrounded by the beeping of machines that were keeping my broken body alive, I held on to one final thread of hope. Somewhere out there, someone still remembered who I really was, and they were preparing to fight back. Recovery came slowly, but with it came an unexpected revelation that would change everything. Patricia Williams. My former head clerk had not only kept meticulous records of every case that had passed through my chambers during my 37 years on the federal bench, but she had also maintained contact with a network of legal professionals who remembered my work with deep respect. When Margaret contacted Patricia about my situation, it triggered a chain reaction that I could never have anticipated. Patricia reached out to Judge Catherine Harrison, a retired Supreme Court justice who had served alongside me on several federal committees. Judge Harrison, appalled by what she learned about my treatment, made a phone call that would prove pivotal. She contacted her former law clerk, David Chen, who had gone on to become one of the most successful civil rights attorneys in the country. Within weeks, I found myself represented by a legal team that Arthur and Brenda could never have imagined I could assemble. David Chen brought with him Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a forensic accountant and business ethics professor from Harvard Law School, and Sarah Mitchell, an investigative journalist whose exposés of corporate corruption had won her 2 Pulitzer Prizes. But the most crucial discovery came from an unexpected source. The small trust fund I had established decades earlier from a grateful client, a wealthy industrialist whose company I had saved from a devastating lawsuit, had grown substantially over the years. I had forgotten about it entirely during my descent into despair, but Patricia had remembered and helped me access funds that gave us the resources to fight back properly. Mrs. Matthews, David Chen, told me during our first meeting in my hospital room, what your son and daughter-in-law have done to you isn't just elder abuse. It's systematic corporate fraud on a massive scale. We're not just going to get your money back. We're going to ensure they face serious federal charges. The federal civil and criminal lawsuit we filed sent shockwaves through the legal community. The charges included corporate fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and defamation. The case attracted global attention not just because of the shocking nature of the family betrayal, but because it highlighted the growing problem of financial elder abuse within prominent families. The trial began 6 months later in a packed federal courtroom. Every major news network covered the proceedings live, and legal experts filled television screens analyzing every development. I sat in the front row, flanked by my legal team, watching as the truth I had carried for so long was finally brought into the light. The climax came when Dr. Rodriguez took the witness stand to present the shadow accounting records I had secretly maintained. The courtroom fell silent as she displayed the real-time financial data on massive screens visible to everyone present. What we see here, Dr. Rodriguez explained, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades unraveling complex financial crimes, is a systematic pattern of embezzlement spanning 3 years. The defendants diverted over $1.2 million from client accounts into personal investments, luxury purchases, and what they euphemistically called business expansion. The evidence was devastating and irrefutable. Every transaction was documented, every falsified document exposed by the digital watermarks I had embedded in the firm's foundational paperwork. The screen showed bank transfers to Brenda's personal accounts payments for Arthur's new car funds used to purchase their luxury home library, all of it stolen from clients who trusted our family name. The digital forensics also reveal systematic tampering with foundational firm documents, Dr. Rodriguez continued. The defendants attempted to alter partnership agreements, client contracts, and financial records, but the embedded watermarks make it impossible to hide their illegal modifications. When Arthur was called to testify, the transformation was heartbreaking to witness. The confident, articulate lawyer who had so convincingly portrayed himself as a concerned son caring for his mentally ill mother was nowhere to be found. Instead, a broken man took the witness stand, his hands shaking as he was sworn in. David Chen methodically presented the evidence piece by piece, watching as Arthur's carefully constructed facade crumbled. The audio recordings of his father's confessions about past ethical violations, the documentation of Arthur's own early misconduct that I had covered up the clear evidence of his systematic theft from the firm, all of it built into an inescapable web of truth. Mr. Matthews, David Chen said, his voice calm and measured, "Are you prepared to tell this court that you did not knowingly divert client funds for personal use?" Arthur opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. His face crumpled, and he began to weep uncontrollably. The weight of his crimes, the magnitude of his betrayal, the irreversible destruction of his reputation, all of it crashed down on him at once. I never meant," he began, but his voice dissolved into incoherent sobbing. His body shook with the force of his breakdown, and court officers had to help him from the witness stand. The sight of my son's complete psychological collapse was devastating, even knowing everything he had done to me. This was the little boy I had taught to tie his shoes, the young man whose law school graduation had filled me with such pride. Now he sat broken and disgraced, destroyed by his own greed and corruption. Brenda attempted to maintain her composure, but when presented with evidence of her role as the primary architect of the conspiracy, her cunning facade shattered into desperate tears. She tried to flee the courtroom when the weight of the evidence became undeniable, but federal marshals apprehended her before she reached the door. Mr. Thompson, the family lawyer who had facilitated so much of their fraud, sat in stunned silence as his own disbarment proceedings were announced. The man who had served our family for decades had been reduced to a co-conspirator in one of the most shocking cases of legal corruption in recent memory. But perhaps the most heartbreaking sight was Kevin, my grandson, sitting in the gallery with tears streaming down his face. As the full scope of his parents' villainy was revealed, I watched the dawning horror in his eyes, the realization of how thoroughly he had been manipulated and used. He looked at me across the courtroom, and for the first time in years, I saw not accusation or pity, but recognition of the truth and profound shame for his unwitting complicity. When the judge gavelled the session closed that day, I felt a complex mixture of vindication and sorrow. Justice was being served, but the cost had been almost unbearable. My family was shattered, my son was broken, and the firm that had been built on principles of integrity had been exposed as a criminal enterprise. Yet underneath the pain, there was something else, a profound sense of relief that the truth had finally been spoken, that the lies and manipulation had been stripped away, and that justice, however delayed, was finally being served. The court's verdict came down like a thunderbolt of justice that reverberated through every corner of the legal community. Judge Patricia Morrison, a stern woman with silver hair and the moral authority of someone who had spent 40 years on the federal bench, delivered her ruling with the gravity befitting such a momentous case. In my 4 decades of judicial service, Judge Morrison began her voice carrying the weight of absolute moral authority. I have rarely encountered such a systematic campaign of elder abuse, financial fraud, and manipulation within a family setting. The defendant's actions represent not merely criminal behavior, but a profound violation of the trust that forms the foundation of both family relationships and the legal profession. Arthur received a sentence of 10 years in federal prison, while Brenda was sentenced to 7 years. The financial restitution ordered by the court exceeded $4 million, covering not only the stolen funds, but also punitive damages for the systematic psychological abuse they had inflicted upon me. Mr. Thompson faced his own criminal charges and immediate disbarment, his 30-year legal career ending in disgrace. But more important than the punishment was the court's formal vindication of my character and legacy. Judge Morrison issued a written statement that was read aloud in the packed courtroom, her words carrying the force of absolute moral clarity. This court finds that Evelyn Matthews, throughout her distinguished 37-year career as a federal judge and her leadership of Matthews and Associates, maintained the highest standards of legal ethics and professional integrity. The allegations made against her mental competence and professional judgment were not only false, but were deliberately fabricated as part of a calculated campaign to defraud her of her life's work. The judge continued, her voice rising with righteous indignation. The abuse of elderly family members represents one of the most insidious forms of betrayal our society faces. When that abuse is perpetrated by those entrusted with legal authority, it becomes not just a personal tragedy, but a stain on the entire profession. This court condemns in the strongest possible terms the systematic psychological manipulation and financial exploitation that Mrs. Matthews endured. As those words echoed through the courtroom, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. For the first time in years, my dignity was not just restored, but officially recognized. The federal court system, the institution I had served with such devotion, had publicly validated everything I had stood for and condemned those who had tried to destroy it. The immediate aftermath of the verdict brought a flood of support from colleagues, former clients, and legal professionals who had followed the case. The State Bar Association issued a formal apology for accepting Arthur's fabricated reports about my mental competence without proper investigation. The Federal Judicial Conference restored my pension and professional honors, acknowledging that I had been the victim of a sophisticated fraud designed to discredit my service. But the most difficult reckoning came in the form of a letter I received 3 weeks after Arthur began serving his sentence. His handwriting, once confident and bold, was now shaky and uncertain, the script of a broken man grappling with the consequences of his choices. "Dear Mom," the letter began, "I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, no right to expect anything from you after what I've done. Sitting in this cell, I've had time to think about everything that led to this moment, and I can't escape the truth of what I became." He wrote about the pressure he felt to live up to our family's reputation, the gradual compromises that led him down a path of corruption, the way Brenda had encouraged his worst instincts while convincing him they were justified. But what struck me most was his recognition of the deeper truth. "I know now that you sacrificed your appeals court appointment to protect Dad's reputation," he continued. "I found his old files when I was cleaning out the office, and I understand what you gave up for our family. The worst part is knowing that I repaid your sacrifice by becoming exactly the kind of lawyer you spent your career fighting against." The letter was filled with desperate pleas for financial help, confused rambling about appeal strategies, and a brokenness that was painful to witness. I read it with profound sadness, recognizing that while justice had been served, it had come at the cost of my son's complete destruction. Brenda's fate was quite different. Her isolation was complete and self-imposed. The woman who had once commanded social gatherings with her charm and wit was now a pariah, abandoned by the social circle she had cultivated so carefully. Even her own family had distanced themselves, unable to cope with the public shame of her conviction. But amidst the wreckage of these relationships, something beautiful began to emerge. Lisa, my daughter, who had remained silent through so much of my ordeal, sought me out 3 months after the trial concluded. I found her waiting in my hotel lobby one evening, her face etched with the kind of profound remorse that can only come from truly understanding the magnitude of one's failures. "Mom," she said, her voice breaking before she could continue, "I don't know how to begin to apologize for what I allowed to happen to you. I was so afraid of Arthur, so intimidated by Brenda, that I convinced myself you really were sick. I told myself I was protecting my family, but I was really just protecting myself from having to choose sides." She spent hours telling me about the fear that had paralyzed her the way Arthur and Brenda had systematically isolated family members who might have supported me the subtle threats about custody of her children if she didn't cooperate with their narrative. But more importantly, she spoke about her commitment to making amends. "I want to help you rebuild," she said with tears streaming down her face. "I want to work beside you at the firm, to learn what it really means to practice law with integrity. I know I can never undo the damage of my silence, but I want to spend whatever time we have left proving that I can be the daughter you deserved all along." Kevin's healing process was more complex, but equally profound. The young man who had publicly sneered at my outdated principles was now grappling with the recognition that those principles were the only thing standing between justice and corruption. He began therapy to process the trauma of discovering that his entire worldview had been built on lies, and slowly, carefully, he began reaching out to reconnect with me. Our first real conversation took place in the law firm's library, surrounded by the legal texts that represented our family's true legacy. Kevin, now 23, sat across from me with the humility of someone who had been forced to confront hard truths about himself and his family. "Grandma," he said, using the affectionate title he hadn't spoken in years, "I need to understand what really happened. Not the version Dad and Brenda told me, but the truth. I need to know how I got so lost, and I need to learn how to find my way back to the kind of lawyer you always believed I could become." We talked for hours that day about ethics and integrity, about the seductive nature of compromise, about the difference between success and achievement. I watched as Kevin began to understand not just what his parents had done to me, but what they had done to him by poisoning his understanding of what it meant to practice law with honor. As I sat in my reclaimed office that evening, surrounded by the books and documents that represented a lifetime of principled service, I felt the complex weight of victory. Arthur and Brenda were paying the price for their crimes, but their punishment brought me no joy. Lisa and Kevin were on a difficult but genuine path toward redemption, and that gave me hope. The firm was mine again, its reputation damaged, but not destroyed its future, uncertain, but filled with the possibility of renewal. Most importantly, the truth had been spoken, justice had been served, and the principles I had spent my life defending had been vindicated. But the real victory wasn't in the courtroom or the restored bank accounts. It was in the recognition that integrity, however tested, however attacked, however temporarily defeated, will ultimately prevail when good people have the courage to stand up and fight for truth. 2 years have passed since the trial that changed everything, and as I sit in my corner office overlooking the city where I've spent my entire legal career, I can honestly say that I have never felt more at peace with my life's journey. The morning sunlight streams through the restored etched glass windows, illuminating the rebuilt law library, where first edition legal texts once again line mahogany shelves, a testament to both tradition and renewal. Matthews and Associates has not merely survived the scandal that nearly destroyed it. It has emerged as something far more meaningful than I ever dared hope. Under my renewed guidance as senior partner emeritus, and with the dedicated leadership of carefully selected ethical lawyers who share our foundational principles, the firm has become a beacon of integrity in a profession often criticized for its moral compromises. We deliberately chose to remain smaller rather than pursue the aggressive expansion that Arthur and Brenda had championed. Every case we accept is evaluated not just for its legal merit and financial potential, but for its alignment with our commitment to justice and ethical practice. Young lawyers seek us out specifically because they want to work in an environment where doing the right thing takes precedence over maximizing billable hours. The most fulfilling aspect of my new role has been the establishment of the Evelyn Matthews Foundation for Ethical Legal Leadership. Using a portion of the restitution funds from Arthur and Brenda's conviction, along with donations from colleagues and former clients who wanted to support our mission, we created a program that provides scholarships and mentorship to law students who demonstrate both academic excellence and unwavering ethical commitment. Every month, I meet with a new group of young legal minds who remind me why I fell in love with the law in the first place. They come with their questions about navigating moral dilemmas, their concerns about maintaining integrity in a competitive profession, their hopes for using their legal education to make a meaningful difference in the world. In their eager faces, I see the future of our profession, and I know that the principles I've fought so hard to preserve will continue long after I'm gone. My relationship with Lisa has blossomed into something more beautiful than it ever was, even during her childhood. She now works alongside me at the firm, not as a token family member, but as a skilled attorney who has proven her commitment to our ethical standards through her actions, not just her words. Her divorce from her husband, who couldn't cope with the family scandal, and her newfound dedication to challenging work was painful, but necessary for her growth. Mom, she told me recently over dinner at our favorite restaurant, I spent so many years being afraid of disappointing people that I lost sight of what really mattered. Working with you now, seeing how you rebuilt your life from nothing, watching you mentor these young lawyers with such patience and wisdom, I finally understand what strength really looks like. We share a daily routine now that brings us both joy. Each morning, we review the Foundation's scholarship applications together, discussing not just academic qualifications, but the character assessments from professors and community leaders. Each afternoon, we walk through the firm's offices, checking in with associates, discussing challenging cases, ensuring that our culture of ethical excellence permeates every aspect of our work. Kevin's transformation has been equally remarkable, though his journey toward healing and redemption continues to require patience and understanding. He completed his law degree while undergoing intensive therapy to process the trauma of his parents' betrayal and his own unwitting complicity in my suffering. His graduation was one of the proudest moments of my life, not because of his academic achievements, but because of the genuine humility and moral clarity he had developed through his painful but necessary self-examination. He now works as a junior associate at our firm, starting at the bottom, despite his family connection, learning the profession the right way, under the mentorship of our most principled senior attorneys. His colleagues respect him not for his name, but for his work ethic, his integrity, and his passionate commitment to the ethical standards that his parents had so thoroughly violated. "Grandma," he said to me last week, as we reviewed a complex pro bono case together, "I know I can never undo the things I said to you the way I participated in hurting you. But I want you to know that every day I work here, every case I handle with integrity, every time I choose to do the right thing, instead of the profitable thing, it's my way of honoring what you tried to teach me all along." The distance between Arthur and me remains vast and likely permanent. His letters from prison arrive monthly, filled with expressions of remorse and desperate pleas for financial assistance that I cannot and will not provide. I read them with sadness, but without anger, recognizing that while forgiveness may be possible, trust has been irreparably shattered. His letters reveal a man struggling to understand how his life went so wrong, grappling with the recognition that his choices led not just to his own destruction, but to the devastation of everyone he claimed to love. I respond occasionally, offering general words of encouragement for his rehabilitation, while maintaining clear boundaries about any future relationship. Brenda, in stark contrast to our family's gradual healing, remains consumed by bitterness and isolation. Her release from prison last year was met with complete social ostracism. The woman who once commanded admiration with her beauty and charm now lives alone in a modest apartment, working at a retail job under an assumed name, her dreams of wealth and status permanently shattered. Sometimes I see her from a distance in the city, a hollow-eyed shadow of her former self, and I feel not satisfaction, but a profound sadness for the waste of human potential. She chose to build her life on lies and manipulation, and the consequences of those choices follow her still. But these shadows from the past cannot diminish the radiant joy I feel when I look around my reclaimed office, when I see Lisa's genuine smile as she discusses a case with a colleague, when I watch Kevin poring over legal precedents with the passionate attention to detail that marks a truly dedicated attorney. The firm that Arthur and Brenda nearly destroyed through their greed has been reborn as something more beautiful and meaningful than it ever was before. Every evening as I lock the office and walk to my car, I pass by the memorial plaque we installed in the lobby, honoring my late husband. The inscription reads simply, Arthur Matthews Sr., founder. Justice is the cornerstone upon which all else must stand. It's a quote from one of his early speeches before the compromises and shortcuts that eventually corrupted his vision. I chose those words not to whitewash his failures, but to honor the man he was before fear and ambition led him astray. In rebuilding this firm on a foundation of unwavering ethical principles, we have fulfilled the promise of what he originally hoped to create while acknowledging and learning from the mistakes that nearly destroyed it. As I drive home each night through the city where I've spent my entire career, I feel a profound sense of completion that has nothing to do with revenge or vindication. The truth was spoken, justice was served, and most importantly, the principles I've spent my lifetime defending have been passed on to a new generation of lawyers who will carry them forward. My victory was not in seeing my enemies punished, but in proving that integrity, however battered, however temporarily defeated, will ultimately prevail when good people have the courage to stand up and fight for what is right. The legacy I leave will not be the pain of betrayal, but the joy of renewal, the proof that it's never too late to reclaim your truth and rebuild your life on the foundation of your deepest values. As I sit in my garden this peaceful Sunday morning, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and rose, I find myself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that brought me from the depths of despair to this moment of profound contentment. At 73, I am not the same woman who was ambushed in that conference room 4 years ago, stripped of her dignity and cast aside by those she loved most. I am stronger, wiser, and filled with a purpose that transcends the pain of what I endured. The law firm that bears our family name now truly embodies the principles my late husband and I envisioned when we first opened our doors 3 decades ago. Under ethical leadership and with a carefully cultivated culture of integrity, Matthews & Associates has become more than just a successful legal practice. It has become a testament to the enduring power of principled leadership. Young attorneys seek us out not for prestige or high salaries, but for the opportunity to practice law in an environment where doing right takes precedence over personal gain. My greatest joy comes not from the restoration of my reputation or the recovery of my stolen assets, though both were important steps in my healing. Instead, it comes from the daily privilege of mentoring the next generation of legal professionals through our foundation, from watching Lisa grow into the ethical lawyer she was always meant to be, and from witnessing Kevin's transformation from a confused young man manipulated by his parents' greed into a principled attorney dedicated to justice. The lessons I've learned through this ordeal have taught me that our greatest strength lies not in blind trust or family loyalty, but in the courage to confront betrayal when it threatens our deepest values. I learned that while familial bonds can be tested to their breaking point by greed and manipulation, true reconciliation is possible when it's built on a foundation of truth, accountability, and genuine remorse. Perhaps most importantly, I discovered that a life's work is not something that can be stolen or destroyed by others, no matter how systematic their attacks or how complete their temporary victory. The principles we stand for, the integrity, we maintain the positive impact we have on others. These form a legacy that exists beyond bank accounts or business ownership or public recognition. To anyone listening to my story who may be facing their own battles with family betrayal, financial abuse, or systematic attempts to undermine their dignity, I want you to know this: your truth has power, your integrity has value, and your fight for justice matters more than you can possibly imagine. The path forward may be longer and more difficult than you expect, but it leads to a place of peace and purpose that no one can ever take away from you. The betrayal I endured was devastating, but it was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new chapter 1, where I learned to rebuild not just my professional life, but my understanding of what really matters: authentic relationships, principled leadership, and the profound satisfaction of knowing that your life has made a positive difference in the world. Today, as I prepare for another week of meaningful work, surrounded by people who respect and value my contributions, I can say with absolute certainty that justice does prevail, integrity does triumph, and it is never too late to reclaim your legacy and live with purpose, dignity, and joy.